Leanna Renee Hieber is best known to steampunk fans as the author of historical fantasies like The Spectral City, The Eterna Files, and the Strangely Beautiful Saga. But she's also a licensed ghost tour guide, and those skills have come together in her first nonfiction book, A Haunted History of Invisible Women, True Stories of America's Ghosts. She co-authored the book with Andrea Janes, who is founder and owner of Burrows of the Dead, a ghost tour company in New York City. So welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Great, great. Now please tell us about the new book.
Oh, it's been a wonderful labor of love between Andrea Janes and myself. And so, A Haunted History of Invisible Women, True Stories of America's Ghosts, explores the intersection between women's history and ghost stories. We talk about women's ghost stories around the country. We've curated a list of women that we're very fascinated by, and we tell their real histories as much as we're able to. And we also talk about how some of the factors that affected their life and affected their surroundings and affected their personalities and their circumstances, how that might affect how we think about them in the afterlife and how their lives affected their ghost stories. We talk about society, we talk about stereotypes, we talk about tropes. The book is broken down into sections. We have witches and madwomen, maidens, mothers, wives, roles that women have been expected to fill through the years. We explore those and how those factor into how we talk about their ghost stories. So it really is an exploration full of existential questions, but a lot of very real and very well researched history. And there's an extensive bibliography in the back, so you will know all our sources. And we try to give back to some of these women some of the stories that are denied in their ghost stories, their full histories. We try to sort of fill in some of the blanks that is left in their spectral form.
I noticed that when I was reading it, it really reads like real history, not just a collection of ghost stories.
It is. It's important to us. That's one of the founding principles of Burrows of the Dead, the company that Andrea founded, my co-author, and that I work for, is that real history is at the core of it. And then we let you be the judge of whether or not you believe the rest of the spectral experiences that have been reported at the sites that we take you to. We are not comfortable just saying things for saying things' sake. We're not interested in jump scares or sensationalizing things beyond the facts that we know. Now, when it comes to ghost stories, what facts can you completely rely upon? Well, that's where it gets into a bit of folk history and oral history and other histories that's just very much sometimes about place memory and people's overactive imaginations. Do we do some debunking in the book? Absolutely. Are there things we cannot debunk? Absolutely. So we really leave a lot of room for you, the reader, to draw your own conclusions, because with ghost stories, it's very hard to pin down fact.
And so now you're both ghost tour guides in New York City, but so you're saying these come from all over the place, from many different places, correct?
They do. And some of them come from areas that I've worked in at other points in my life. I started my career as a professional actress, touring the country, doing Shakespeare and other classical theater pieces around the country. And I ended up in Minnesota for a while and did some ghost tours there. But I'm from Ohio originally. And so we have some wonderful Ohio stories in the book. And we wanted to make sure that we were as representational as we could be. We don't hit every one of the 50 states. We're more interested in trying to see how some of the stories we chose fit into some of these categories than we were dealing with the geography of it. But we wanted to have somewhat representational sites from around the country, but it really was more not as much about geography as it was about these interesting ladies and their stories and their surroundings. We would love to do more. This is by no means a comprehensive encyclopedia. It's not a compendium because we only had so much space. So hopefully the book will do well, and we would love, if it does, to continue this as a bit of a series.
Oh, great, great. Having read it, or a good portion of it, I would be looking forward to that. Now the book starts off with a tragic story about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in Lower Manhattan. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's the most horrific industrial accident of this country. And on March 25th, 1911, a fire broke out on the top floors of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory building. That factory shared its space with other companies, but the top floors were the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. When this fire broke out, everything that could go wrong within that building went wrong. And it all went wrong because the factory owners were completely neglecting any safety protocols for the building. And workers were locked into the building and they were locked into their floors to keep them focused on their work, when it really was also a control measure. In many ways, it was to keep union organizers out from the building. This controlling measure, not keeping up with the fire escape, not keeping up with other safety suggestions that the fire marshals had been putting into place, that workers had been striking about just the year prior. In 1910, the uprising of the 20,000 was the nation's largest labor movement protest that broke out in New York City, specifically as a reaction to all of the unsafe labor practices that were creating fires and other hazards all through New York City and other parts around any industrialized city and around the world as well. So the strikers were saying, hey, we need to be able to get out of the building. We need to not have such a flammable building. The stairways in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory were all wooden staircases, and all of them were engulfed immediately. The fire escape was not kept up to code at all. Well, there wasn't a code. So this was before code. So the fire escape was rusted, and when women got out onto it, they all fell to their deaths. It's the most horrific story, and I don't frankly have time to go into the whole depths of the story. It really is everything that you could think of in an unimaginable workplace disaster. All of it was in play. 146 people died in very short amount of time. Everything was over within 15 minutes. The entire fire had swept through. The exterior of the building was stone, but the interior was all flammable. Out of the 146 people that died, 123 of them were women as young as 14 years old. And many of them died.
And this place is now reputedly haunted.
It is reputedly haunted. These particular accounts have been given through the years by people who have worked in this building now. It is no longer a factory. It is part of New York University's their biological studies program. So I've been up to the top floors, and it's laboratories. So it's a bunch of microscopes and people in lab coats. But secretaries there through the years and other students and participants in the programs have talked about seeing figures falling from the windows, seeing shadows, hearing screams, smelling smoke, smelling other things that are unpleasant regarding people trapped in a burning building. It is full of what we call in the ghost tour business a place haunting, a residual haunting. It's like the imprint of that terror imprinted itself onto the building itself. And so it's both a mixture of every sense of the details of that day that people have reported having experienced somehow. There have been reports of figures going down the hall in a long dress, and if somebody calls out to them, they might turn and part of their figure is blackened or smoking. It's all of these things. And again, it could be overactive imagination for people who have been in this building, but it hasn't been just one account through the years. It's in all of, the ghost tour accounts of the area. It's in a lot of the historical record. This is not an unknown fire. This touched off our entire labor movement. So it's been very well known. In terms of the actual accounts, they don't come down to pinning down to a specific person or a specific history. But for me as a tour guide, I'm interested not so much in the specific details of what that haunting is or who that haunting might be, but that the haunting is a representation of making sure we don't forget what happened there. That for me is the takeaway, that these spectral imprints are on this building, are at that site to remind us to never let down our guard about our own labor laws, because this was before labor laws. And after this tragedy, the reaction was such that there became labor laws. And that was ushered in by a woman by the name of Frances Perkins, who was the first female cabinet member. She was the first female to serve in that capacity and served as the fourth labor secretary. And she watched the Triangle Factory fire happen. She was at a cafe and came out to watch commotion on the street, like thousands of other New Yorkers who were watching this unfold in real time. And she watched this horror, and she dropped everything she was doing, and she went out to campaign for labor laws. And she said, she was quoted as saying, the New Deal, which was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's large sweeping legislation of trying to create recovery for the nation after the Great Depression. She said the New Deal began the day the Triangle burned.
Wow.
And so she helped usher in laws that I want to make sure we never take for granted.
Wow. Well, now this is obviously a very tragic tale, and there are a lot of the stories in the book are quite sad. But you also had a more uplifting story about a woman named Mary Becker Greene. Please tell us about her.
I love Ma Greene. So she was referred to as Ma by everybody. She was the first woman to receive a steamboat pilot's license in the late 19th century. She married a steamboating man, and she said that that's when you live the steamboating life, it is in your blood. And so she married into the Greene family, and they had the Greene family line of steamers. And so these steamboats were traveling up and down the rivers on the East Coast, so along the Mississippi and specifically along the Ohio River, which is near Cincinnati, which is my hometown. So it was neat to have a hometown spirit in this. Her family purchased the Delta Queen, and that is the ship that she really, really took to, and to the point where she was running the company along with her son after her husband passed. She was co-owners, even in the 19th century, she was a co-owner in the Greene family line of steamers right from the start, which to have a female co-owner in the 19th century when women's property laws were still in flux, this was a nice move forward. And her getting she was the first woman to get a steamboat pilot's license, and she piloted these boats through some pretty incredible scenarios through the years. And so the Delta Queen was kind of her favorite sort of show boat. She did a lot of advising on the restoration of this boat, and it was working well into the 20th century, and it is the boat that she died upon.
And so this is not a tragic ending to her life. She lived a full life, correct?
No, she lived a huge full life, and she died where she would have wanted to be, in the stateroom of her steamboat that was hers. And she just died of old age. I mean, it was, so she lived a very long, healthy, happy life. And many on the Delta Queen have said she's never left, because she's woken people up. She's woken up engineers to alert them to a problem on the boat. And if she hadn't woken them up, and the engineers, who are, the straight, level-headed people, have not been able to explain why they were shoved awake or why they heard an elderly woman's voice, insisting they get up and note that there's a hole in the boat or there's a fire on the boat. In a couple of different scenarios, she has saved the boat. There have been phone calls from her stateroom requesting something, and then someone will go to the stateroom and find it empty, and that was her stateroom. Her picture, there's a portrait of her on the Delta Queen, and her picture has sort of come to life when people are looking at it. She had such an animated presence. People would buy tickets to go on her steamboats just to have her company. But the thing of it is that she didn't drink. She really hated alcohol. So she was an avid teetotaler, and no alcohol was on her boat. So one of her last words in this, after her passing, the steamer decided they were going to put a bar into the ballroom, which again would have been expressly against Ma's orders. And so as they were starting construction on this, a barge plows into the side of the Delta Queen, directly at the bar, demolishes the new bar. They pull the barge out, and they see that the name of the barge is the Mary B.
Wow.
Mary Becker Greene having the last word. People couldn't even believe it. I mean, it's almost so unlikely, but at the same time, if you start learning about Ma Greene, she was this literal force of nature, this little petite lady who loved to dance the Virginia reel and would pilot the steamboat and then go like sew curtains for the guest rooms. Like, it's just, she really was, she was a mother. She gave birth on a steamboat in between pilot shifts. I mean, this lady was absolutely epic. So I love lifting her up because she's a hoot.
Wow. Now that's quite a story. It's and now, but I guess a book like this wouldn't be complete without a chapter on Sarah Winchester and the Winchester Mystery House, right? Why don't you tell us about her and how you told her
Correct.
story?
Oh my goodness. Well, so this is one of the longer chapters in the book because I'm really attached to Sarah Winchester as a person. I came to really grow to love her. I was already interested in her, and then through the course of this chapter, I became extremely protective of her, much like many of the tour guides at the Winchester Mystery House are, as is the house historian, Janin Boehm. She was critical in helping me with this chapter because I went to the Mystery House specifically in San Jose, California, to research this chapter. I knew I could not write about this house without going to visit this house. And Janin, the house historian, also is protective of Sarah's reputation, because the thing of it is that she got this reputation throughout history, and this was happening even during her lifetime, that she was building this huge mansion, and she would kept putting on these additions, and she kept building, and she kept building, and she was this quirky, reclusive, shy lady who never entertained in her large, sprawling mansion. So all of these rumors grew about her. It was said that she was trying to escape the guilt of those killed by the Winchester rifle. It was said that she was a spiritualist, and she was conducting seances to try to appease the spirits who had been telling her, driving her to keep building. And if she didn't keep building the house, that she would fall ill and that there would be great tragedy to her. All of this was absolute fabrication. All of it was put onto her as sort of a reason for why she was doing what she was doing. The reality of it is she was a lady who had a lot of money. She gave a lot to charity, millions in dollars then. So she inherited millions of dollars in the late 19th century when her husband, William Winchester, died. She had just recently lost her only child, a baby who was born with a condition known as marasmus, which is you can't digest protein, and this baby starved to death. This was before we had a cure for this. It was a horrible tragedy. Then her husband dies of tuberculosis. So she's already had tragedy. She doesn't necessarily need to have more tragedy onto this. So she goes away from New Haven, Connecticut, where she was born and raised and where they lived. And she goes to kind of create a new life for herself in San Jose. And she really liked architecture. Her and William loved architecture together. They helped plan their in-laws' house. It was a pastime that they enjoyed talking about. She subscribed to all of these architectural magazines, and she would sketch out her own visions for the house on napkins, on papers, on stuff that's around anytime an idea came to her. And she liked employing people. She liked being a business owner, basically. So she paid twice that any other person paid for labor. And people loved working for her, and she just would give them projects to do. And so it really was a lot more kind of benign, and a bit of like using the house as a bit of an architectural sketchbook, but in real time, actually making it happen. And then if it didn't quite work out, well, then she would say, okay, well, then she would build around it. So in some ways, some of the quirkiness of the house is mainly because she was experimenting, truly, at a time when she wouldn't have been able to be taken seriously as an actual architect. And so all of these other sort of suppositions about her wild intentions, that was really put on by those who opened the house after her death as an amusement attraction. It was literally bought by a man who had run a theme park, and it opened as the Winchester Amusement Company right after her death, because she didn't name the house in her will to anyone, which is a wild and curious thing. Again, Sarah made all these decisions in her life, and she didn't explain herself ever, which is where the room for conjecture came in. But at the end of the day, even though her reasoning is a little bit curious, at the end of the day, it was not quite the lavish and spiritualist and ghostly driven thing that the Winchester Amusement Company made it out to be, and created a legend around somebody who had already had people saying about these things about her when she was alive. the first notions of her going west to appease the guilt of those dead from the Winchester rifle, that first appeared in the very early 1900s. And so that was sort of dogging her. And she never said one way or another whether she was or she wasn't a spiritualist. Her close relatives say she was not a spiritualist. She never espoused that. Spiritualism and contacting the dead through seances, that was a popular parlor trick. So she would have been aware of it and familiar with it. But because she never said one way or another about it, people just assumed. Because she always wore black and she was always in mourning. She never stopped wearing mourning for the loss of her beloved husband. So again, all of these kind of wild speculations. Was she quirky in her own person? Absolutely. Did she have her own mind about things? Yes. Did she not explain herself? Yeah, she really didn't. And she didn't leave much record about it. There's a wonderful biography called Captive of the Labyrinth by Mary Jo Ignoffo. And it's an incredible book. And it was vital to me trying to get the facts straight about this woman. In a house that is still, though, legitimately haunted. So all this to say, while the legends about her are not true, and as much as I loved Helen Mirren in the movie Winchester, and she was beautiful and wonderful, the truth about that is that she was a very kind woman and a very intelligent woman. And that is true in the film. Helen Mirren portrays that very well. All the rest of the fantastical stuff, no. Is the house haunted? Yes. It's haunted by workers who loved Sarah, loved that house, and who were treated very well. They were treated like family in really nice staff quarters. She would often give houses that were on the properties she was accruing to her staff people. She left money in her will to her staff, to her gardener. She really was kind of this unique lady who did not have the same boundaries between class as other people did. She was just extremely generous. And that generosity lives on in the house in that the spirits kind of want to still stay there and be a part of it. And seances through the years and psychics have reported Sarah's energy there. I will say from going into the room where she died, you can feel a moment of pause. It's like time stops in that room where she passed. There's a very different space. It's a very different energy in that room. So there's something there. There is a spectral weight to that house. There is a confounding confusion about it. You cannot find your way through. We were taken through at a clip, and I could not tell you any way in which I could orient myself because it really is just one corridor after another. I thought I'd be more claustrophobic. I wasn't. It's actually a lot more open, a lot more airy because Sarah built in skylights in a very clever angles, and so it's very well lit. But it is truly endless. It's a 160-room mansion, and it doesn't always make sense. So you are confounded and confused, and that adds a little bit to this sense of true mystery. So is the Winchester Mystery House still a bit of a mystery? Absolutely. It's sort of a existential mystery, and my chapter is called Unfinished Business, because it was, in fact, never completed, and aren't we all?
Okay. Yeah, having toured it myself, I can hear what you're saying. So now, how will you be promoting the book?
We're doing so many events all across the country, which is really exciting. So we've got a mixture of in-person events as well as online events. So there'll be something that everyone can get to one way or another. So there'll be a list of things available on my website, and we'll continue to update that as we go. I do know my November is going to be quite busy in part in Salem, Massachusetts, and there are several Salem chapters in the book. I'll be doing a Paracon, a paranormal convention at the Salem Paracon in mid-November. I'll also be doing an event at the Harvard Bookstore, the bookstore of Harvard University, on November 10th. So we've got in-person things at some of our, haunted locations, but also a lot of online things with a bunch of wonderful independent bookstores around the nation. So there'll be lots of material. You can hear us give talks as we go. And I'll be definitely present at lots of steampunk conventions throughout the next year as well.
Yeah, so why don't you tell us about that? What's your calendar looking like for next year?
I know for sure I'll be a guest of honor at the Chicago Steampunk Expo, and that'll be next spring. And also my hometown, the International Steam Symposium, which has been moved to June this next year. That is my hometown Steampunk Con. I've been a part of that since its inception, and I'm always thrilled to return as their author in residence.
That's the one in Cincinnati, right?
That's the one in Cincinnati. And then others are going to be filling in as we go. I'll be a part of the Stupid Cupid Festival in February. mid-February, that is going to be in Manchester, Connecticut. So there's a great East Coast steampunk scene, so I'll be part of that. And then hopefully some other things will come up as we go. Again, I'll have everything available on my appearances page on my website, so leannarenehieber.com.
Okay. Well, you've shared a lot of really good information with us, and this looks like a really, really good book. Like I said, I've read a good portion of it, and I highly recommend it.
Thank you so much. It's available wherever books are sold. It's available digitally, it's available in audiobook, and it's also available in trade paperback, in this lovely paperback. And there's pictures. So, yeah, wherever books are sold. And support your local independent bookstore. If you go onto a website called indiebound.org, you can plug in your zip code, and it will show you where the local independent bookstore that's nearest to you, and you can always order it in if they don't have it on the shelf.
Great. Well, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.